Okay, this is going to be a bit awkward because this is like not the regular way I'm starting my stream. So I don't know at which point it's actually started, but hopefully it did. Yes, so we have Dave in chat asking about this. So this is the story. I tried to submit this talk like 3 months ago, and it was like a completely different talk. But I eventually kind of like did it. It was August 3rd. And I tried to record it, but my just like screen capture died. So the whole video is just like the first slide and the audio. So it's basically like unwatchable. So what I'm trying to do right now is I will try to play that video so so that we can reuse like audio stuff, but I will redo the slides and like the visuals and all that stuff. I never kind of like tried it or like rehearsed it, so it could be like worse. So I could just like try to redo it again, but yeah, this is going to be an experiment. Yeah, so this is the video. It's like 1 hour, so uh, hopefully a re-recording of it is not going to take too much time, but yeah, uh, it works for like the first, I don't know, like a few minutes until like TV turned off or something like that, and OBS died. So um, okay, so let's try it. This is where we're starting it, and let's see. So at first, I was just, oh, this is like the organizer. uh, so at
React
first,
for everyone has.
they would just like introduce me all that stuff. I was using like lapel mic, so uh, it was also like an experiment. What it ended up doing is that like you can't hear anyone except for me, which is like good. Like the audio quality is actually like pretty good, but when like someone else is talking, like you couldn't hear like anything. So okay. So let's try to play for like first few minutes that I have. The funny thing is that like this is like my screen, but there's also like my screen capture from the video because I'm showing the video. Yeah, so this is going to be like a bit silly. Uh, but yeah, I don't have a better plan for now. Yeah, which is usually good because it's like there's no noises. But yeah, when someone is telling something, it's not great in the recording. So okay, so let's start.
So we're going to talk about React Server components. Everyone have opinions about them. We're going to touch some of them. Um, I'm going to use my editor for like everything, including slides. And we want to see a list of like social networks that already dead. This one is not really dead, right? It's just renamed, but it's um, everything is on my GitHub. So if you want to like try those examples, or if you see a typo, just let me know. Um, the first is that I will kind of like address a little bit of like narrative. So you can just like put every fact that is there and just like make a narrative out of it.
Okay, I think at this point screen capture already died because I'm talking about like the next slide. Yeah, and I'm not sure how I can like make it. Uh, I can keep track of everything, so I will just like put the video on the other screen. Okay. Yeah. Okay. You guys can like talk between each other. I will try to keep it on topic. So this is like the first slide on the narrative
of it, and one of the most popular ones is that React hired everyone from React team. Vercel hired everyone from React team because Vercel's business is for you to spend serverless time. React is now a server framework just so they can they can make much more money. And
this is where the audience would like laugh, but you couldn't hear that because of the mic.
This is a fun one. I kind of like picked some things from Twitter, but so Ryan Florence created this component, which I don't remember when it was, but it was definitely like before hooks, and obviously like then React does hooks, and it looks a lot like a component. Ryan also had this like create context library that also kind of like suspiciously inspired like design of React context later. He then co-created Remix, right? So this was the original why my React looks like PHP now. I have SQL right in my components, what is going on. This idea of like progressively enhanced forms, that is like now is a standard. Every framework has it, like SvelteKit, Solid Start, Quick Start, like Quick City. So like all of them have it. This is like the norm now, right? And some other ones. And now we have this new release of like Next and React Server Components, and like all of the features are really kind of like traceable. But if you talk to anyone from React team, they have kind of like a I don't know if this is like too small. Make it like that. If you talk to someone from React team, they see it completely different. So first, hooks have like nothing to do with any kind of like reactive libraries before. They're just inspired by like I forgot how it's called, but algebraic effects or something like that. It exists in functional programming languages like F, Coca, and OCaml. Again, if you get my slides, you can get all the links that I'm showing here. There is this fun one where on Remix conference, Dan Abramov addresses directly this claim about like that Vercel is now in charge of React, and yeah, so it's a funny one.
I guess since I have time to play it now, I can play it.
This collaboration started like several years ago. On the one hand, I get a lot of criticisms of Vercel. On the other hand, it just gets under my skin when people say, "Oh, like Vercel is telling the React team what to do." Well, like actually, the
React team is telling Vercel what to do.
Ricky is out of frame, so he said that, but like you can see him.
It's more complicated, but the reality is Vercel has invested years into building out our vision, and like when Sebastian left Meta, if Vercel was not building a server components framework, he would have gone somewhere else that would have been that client that would have been willing to build it.
Yeah, so he could still like work on the thing that he was interested in.
Yeah, because he's building the architecture. Like he knows what he wants to do, and there needs to be a place to prove it out. Yeah, and so that's kind of part of it. Like they've invested years of like full-time engineering time into proving out our direction, and we appreciate that, and we want to extend that to more companies as well. This collaboration.
Yeah, so first, sorry, 8 imaginary dollars. And like the funny thing is that he said that at Remix conference, right? So, and I was doing my talk at Remix meetup.
So if we're talking about React Server components themselves, so you can hear about them. You can kind of like trace everything back to I would say like React 16.6. That's where like suspense started to be introduced. Like the first question that everyone asked was, okay, where am I going to get like suspense on the server, and like what would that mean, and all of those things. So one thing that I think a lot of people kind of like skip, but it explains a lot of how React Server components are, is kind of like just Relay and GraphQL in general. That was the first time when we started to ask ourselves like, hey, can all of our components declare their own data dependencies so that like Relay or React or whatnot, they can get all of those dependencies in some kind of like optimal way, hopefully. And I will have like a snippet that kind of like talks a bit more about that. But I think it's still fair to say that it was a remix that inspired a lot of those kind of like progressively enhancement things, and even like actions themselves are pretty close to how like Remix or Selkit do this. So I think no one from React team will try to say that this one wasn't inspired by Remix. So you have to believe in like multiple discovery, right? So like different people working on different things can come to kind of like the same conclusions. So this is this is where I have to make a bit of a disclaimer. So I started working on this talk like 3 months ago, and there's like so much content. My original idea was to compare React Server components to island architecture, because there are a lot of similarities, but there are a lot of differences. And like parts of that talk are still here, but it's kind of I realized that it's kind of like impossible to talk about that without like first introducing what React Server components are, then explaining what like in islands architecture is, and then like if audience knows both, then you can kind of like talk about React Server components and islands. And yeah, so this is this is like kind of like a fair warning. So
Yeah. Okay, I forgot what I was going to say, but I didn't have how do I say it? Just like dry run or something like that. I didn't try to talk to measure how long this talk takes, and until the last moment, like I just didn't know how much time they're going to give me. So I was like, okay, if I have a 5-minute talk, this is what I'm going to talk. If I have like an hour talk, this ended up being, I don't know, like an hour and a half talk, and I just had to kind of like cut in the end for time.
A lot of discussion about React Server components is happening in the format of like, oh, React Server components are just X, and depending on who are talking to, they will say like silly stuff from just a way for Vercel to make more money to like different comparisons. And so for for example, someone could say that React Server Components are just React queries, so just a way to get your data right in an ergonomic way, and to have an API to like invalidate your caches and all that stuff. So that's something that someone could say. Someone could say that React Server Components are just like islands. You have like server at the root, then you have those like islands of interactivity that are hydrated, all that stuff, which is like maybe like one way of looking at it. And this one is kind of like close to me because I mentioned like that relay thing. So this is just like a way for components to for components to declare what kind of like data dependencies they have, and it looks a lot of kind of like how GraphQL is in general, but like how relay is in particular. For example,
at this part, I kind of forgot what I was going to talk about, so this is why it's kind of like so awkward.
One of the features of RSC is this kind of like lazy loading of your client bundles depending on the data that you get, and this was kind of like innovated by Relay, but this is all the documentation that is there for this feature. So this feature that existed for like 5 years, if you want to use it, yeah, just try to.
I tried to make kind of like it funnier, but I think it's not really like playing out. But the idea is that React Server Components have this feature where if you have like a Facebook feed, right, and there could be like 1,000 types of posts, if the feed that I opened that has 20 posts and only like 3 types of posts, I can only download 3 basically like modules, right, or components to render it. And GraphQL with Relay would allow you to do that, so that your query basically returns data and kind of like a link to the module that you can load, you can lazy load, or I don't know, like run. And yeah, I couldn't find any like examples or documentations for that, so
to figure it out. Yeah. So all of those tweets are mine, by the way. So if you're wondering who is this guy who's like talking about this stuff and doesn't know what he's talking about, that's me. And yeah, so just keep it in mind. As I said, it's basically impossible to talk about this thing in a kind of like reasonable time, especially if you're doing like a tweet, right? There's just kind of like no way. Yeah, but the main point is that the main point that I'm going to talk about is like this notion of like unnecessary complexity. Like React Server Components introduces this new concept that is like has no use. And I'm going to prove a bit that it's not that complicated, and it has a use. That's basically the talk. So I'm going to contrast that to a talk that Dan Abramov did. I don't know, like just a poll of the audience, like how many people watched that? One? Okay.
Yeah, that was a bit awkward. I think there were just like a lot of new people on that particular day, and I bet probably like half of them haven't even like tried Remix itself. So when I asked like, "Hey guys," they were like, "Have you watched this talk from Remix conference about React Server Components?" It's just like kind of like half. Yeah, there were like a few people, I think. Actually, did anyone from organizers watch it? I don't know, but it was a bit surprising. I was like, oh, I have to like dumb this down somehow. This kind of like advanced topic, but yeah, that was a bit awkward. And again, like because you don't hear the audience. There were like a few moments where like people would laugh, and yeah, you can't hear that.
He explains the kind of like the alternative history of like there are obviously server components, server frameworks, and there are obviously like client frameworks, right? So you have like PHP on one side and you have React on the other side. And it's now when this mix is happening, it could have happened from the other side as well. And it actually did happen. So there is this project called Marco.js, which started in like 2011 or something, so like a few years before React, I think, or maybe like just at the same time as React. But they did actually do that the way that he described. So it was just a regular kind of like PHP kind of like looking templating framework, and they eventually added kind of like islands, and they eventually added this like automatic islands where it kind of like automatically detects. So you're like authoring in the same style, and it just like detects what to run on the client and on the server. So it's like it did actually happen. So it's not that crazy idea, but I'm arguing that it's like it's not it's not the best way to think about React Server components like in particular. So let's talk at it as it actually happened. So let's imagine that we have a view library that can turn something into like a DOM that you see on the screen. So first thing that like how you would use that library is how it got actually used. For the first few years, React was used in a way where you will have your page rendered with PHP, and then you will just go to places where you had jQuery before, and you will replace that with React. So instead of like selecting by the string and adding event listeners, you now like render the whole button in React, and you can kind of like easily manage all of its state and all of that stuff. But you still have this like imperative way to talk to it because it has a render function. From kind of like outside of React, you can like send new props or do some other stuff to kind of like to talk to your like whole system. So what should happen kind of like first is that if you wanna build a server framework with React, you have to put everything inside of React, because server frameworks have to send like title and like meta tags and all of that kind of like SEO stuff. So it's like this is the required first step. And so then the second step is trying to figure out the routing, because in traditional server frameworks, what you usually do is just you click on a link and it like goes to that page, and it will recreate everything all the time when you're navigating. So and it's actually like different from how and like in React and in server frameworks, you will like kind of like think about it differently. So in server frameworks, they're thinking, oh, but like how do I keep this thing kind of like static? So I have like a video player playing. How do I keep it playing? But in React, obviously, like we already have everything under like the client component. Now your problem is different. Like how do I change stuff when I click on links? How do I find like what to change instead of what to keep? Because like what to keep part is kind of like automatic. That's given to you by React. So one related thing to getting data on navigation is to get code in navigation, because you're going to the different page, you might be getting different different code as well. So like one option is just to send like everything all at once. But if you're thinking about it like as like a real framework, you have this is like one of the first problems that you have to solve is like, how do I ship only the required JavaScript, but then if I click on the link to show me like a comments, right? I want to get those comments components as well with like the comments data. So, and my kind of like thing is that I think it's kind of like different how how traditional frameworks think about it. So it's slightly like unbelievable for me to to imagine that React could be explained as like a server component, server framework that turned client, because in that world you will probably never put like everything in the client component. It just doesn't seem kind of like doesn't seem reasonable. Okay, I'm just checking if I said everything. So one thing also is that kind of like I think is a bit problematic with this, is that traditional server frameworks have kind of like always worked on this level of like, hey, I have this request, and that request have like this header, and I'm going to set like this cookie and all that stuff. And React doesn't really like do any of that stuff. So it's like if you're using like server framework, like they have to do like some of that stuff. But it's again, that's me criticizing that talk. That no.
I guess I'll like interject for a second. So I was like watching some HTMX things. I was like, oh, how do I use HTMX with Django and all that stuff? And it kind of like quickly reminded me of how like real server frameworks work. It's like, oh, just like add a header to this response. Oh, just use like a partial for this response and all that stuff. And it's like, oh yeah, like you can't do like any of the stuff in React. I mean, you have to do some of that stuff in like in yeah. That's it was funny when I was on JavaScript Jabber and I was talking about like real backends and all that stuff. Like I guess like I forgot to modify my message a bit for like JavaScript crowd. Yeah. But even in Astro, you have like more of that. It's kind of like more more integrated into like I'm rendering this page, but that page could be like a post request. I can kind of like quickly check that, and you have some of that stuff in like Next or Remix, but I think you have more of that in Fresh out of the like all the kind of like modern frameworks. But yeah, there is definitely a difference, and there is it definitely that idea of like, oh yeah, React server components is almost the same as PHP, and it's like not really. If you use that that kind of framework, you know that's not true. What's missing? Okay, so let me just quickly show some Astro code, I guess. So if I go to, don't even know what I should be looking for. I think it was like in some demos, maybe. Yeah. So this is this kind of like sort of stuff I'm talking about. Like this this returns HTML. I mean, this is probably not the greatest example. Like tabs is probably better. Yeah, so this returns HTML. Yeah, I guess. Okay, I have like another example, but it's like more complicated, so I don't want to go there. But this returns HTML, but I can still do some like some stuff when I when I get the request. So I can like add a header. I can do some checks and all that stuff, and it's kind of like the part of the page response. It's just like yeah, and I can return. Sometimes I'm like returning strings. Sometimes I'm returning like HTML. I just like add a accept header for like a JSON if I want to return JSON, all that stuff. So it's really like how server frameworks are. Like the Astro is kind of like in the middle, so it's optimized more for kind of like React world, but you can do more stuff like in real backend frameworks. Sending back UI and a post request. Yeah, so so one thing that you have to do in React Server Components, for example, is that like the same URL have to return HTML or React Server Components payload, depending on like which header was passed. And this is the part that is like hidden from you. This is just like internal implementation, but in real frameworks, this is what you can kind of like easily achieve. If I'm already sending a page, it's just a question of like adding a few ifs to change it to do like different things. And yeah, it's basically just a question of like what is the what is the unit of concern, kind of like for traditional frameworks the unit is page. I'm responding for request and all that stuff. You can do that in modern frameworks, but that's where you go to like API routes and all that stuff, and it's like it's clearly different. Like API route or like page route are like working on completely different levels, while in even like in Astro, it's less of a kind of like less of a difference there. But in real backend frameworks, there's going to be basically like no difference. Yeah, I don't know like how kind of like important that point is, but it's just that idea of like, oh yeah, it could have happened the other way around. It could have, but like it didn't. And I just wanted to point out some of the things that kind of like don't line up with that. But again, like it actually did happen for Marco, and in a bit like smaller scale for Astro, because Astro was much later.
All unwatched, unfortunately. Okay, so so those steps that I described, they don't sound like too crazy or like too complicated. Yeah, just implement all of that stuff. And it also doesn't it also actually doesn't require you to change like React the library that much. So the changes that happened in kind of like React 18, say, they are mostly to make this process optimal. They are not to allow you that process, if that makes sense. So it's like most of the React Server components you can implement with like old React, like even like with class components and stuff. So it's just yeah, all the changes, if you look at them, they're like, oh, this is how we like dedupe stuff so that you don't get like hit with delays. This is how we like do that stuff or other stuff. So it's not really kind of like critical in a sense. You know, just one kind of like fun note again, like just comparing to other frameworks. I think for React it was easy to implement React Server components because React already had JSX and VDOM. It was kind of like easy to overload those things to mean a bit like different stuff compared to some other frameworks, right? So if you're a traditional framework that is like, I don't know, like Python, and it returns like HTML string, there is like a world of difference on trying to add kind of like a client interactivity to it. Okay, so this is where the fun begins. This is where we're going to look at some demos. Yeah, just a fun note. Have anyone used React without JSX? Old school. Yeah. So
I think it's all like 3 people or maybe more.
the idea was that when I started using React, React was not supported by TypeScript, which is, I don't know if that's like surprising for someone or not. Huh?
It wasn't supported by TypeScript because like TypeScript was like Angular thing. It's like, yeah, only Angular people use TypeScript. Like why would why would they use TypeScript?
Yeah. React itself is still written in Flow, and it was kind of like expected for you to I mean, not expected, but like encouraged it a bit. Like, yeah, just use Flow. It's like everything works in Flow. So we used React and TypeScript, so we didn't have JSX for like a few years, and it was fine. It just gives me like a bit different perspective to people who like haven't used it before. So it's going to be pretty.
I still prefer Angular's TypeScript DX over React. Okay, I don't know what that means. Not having to define prop types is so much nicer. Okay, I think that's like two different things. Yeah, I didn't mention prop types there, but that was like a thing to do without TypeScript. Props such as class properties. Yeah. I mean, I don't understand the difference. Yeah, the problem with classes is kind of like that talk that or everyone is on Twitter is like, oh, what's cooler, like Zod or Velibot, and it's like, oh, but if you want to make the library smaller, you have to do functions instead of the builder pattern, and props on class for me look like a builder pattern, so that like we used to have that in class components, right? So you would add like 10 props, but like how do you make sure that you're no longer using them? Because it's on class, so it's already kind of like used. So like I don't know. I guess maybe there are like lint rules or something like that could help you. But yeah, I never wrote Angular. I kind of like missed that whole time frame. Like I was doing backend at that time, so I never wanted to return and check what that was about. Even those class components, you need to define type props separately and pass it as a generic. Okay, so I guess you're complaining about like kind of like passing it twice, like specifying it twice. Yeah, I wonder how we dealt with that. I think it was in class components, it was like this dot props. So when you do constructor, you just do constructor props colon and then define type of the prop. And would you duplicate that somewhere? Not really. So I don't know. Yeah, let's return to class components. I think that was the solution. Yeah. My component instance components props. Yeah. And now when you define props, you write it. Yeah, I don't know. I don't feel the pain for some reason. And I guess, and I haven't tried the alternative to know what's the difference. But it feels like you can find a way to just write it once if you so desire. Okay, yeah. So I'm not sure how I'm going to do demos, because it's like, how would I know what I'm going to show on the screen? But yeah, let's see.
See, pretty interesting for all of you. Okay, so we're going to go to first demo. Okay. So this is how it looks. Not impressive. It just shows hello. This is how the code looks.
Okay, so I'm showing this file. And show. Okay. Okay, it seems like I edited it already. Where's the hello to? Oh yeah, I was showing how the render function works. Okay, so let's do, so return it back to hello. Okay, so show hello.
So this is a file. Like, I'm not using a bundler. I don't have like a server. This is really I found it kind of like the best way to show how kind of like not magical everything is I have .html file that is like literally on my file system. Okay, I don't know how to make UI bigger, but it starts with like slash there. So again, if you work with React all the time, you probably don't remember this, but this is HTML.
I got some laughs from the audience. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
It's different from JSX. And in the way that it's different is that if you want to render that hello thing, we can't really put hello here. because like just in terms of like HTML.
Okay, I think I was showing something like this. So you can't do like h1 hello, right?
All doesn't make sense. So like we started the script tag here, we just expect everything to be string. Like why are you putting this hello thing here? It's like it's not going to work. But this is how React works. So React, this is like CDN. You can get React from like any of them. There's like a popular one like Unpackage. I think Brian Florence created that or something like that. So this is just a syntax to import React. So if you go to like DevTools and you just like insert it there, okay.
So if you go to DevTools and if you do this, it will not work because the terminal is not in module mode. So this will not work, but you can do import list.
Oh yeah, I need to use like a different syntax, but it's just going to import the library. And again, you don't need you don't need anything like don't need any fancy bundlers. You just do like here's the lazy, here's the memo, right? So like the whole React, and yeah, here's the secret internals, do not use it or you will be fired. React is split in two packages. So one is React that is like it's the same React when you use React Native. It's the same when you like do all the 3D stuff and like all of that stuff. So it's like it's just kind of like the API of React itself. But React DOM is the package that will actually render your React components to the page. And the API that you use is that you first create a root. So like this thing is root. And that basically connects, it connects to like some element on the page. And then
so I had this code where I would just create root.render and then I split it up because I knew that like there were a lot of juniors. I split it up. So this is how you create the root. You basically connect it to the element, and then you can render React elements inside of DOM elements. And yeah, that's what I'm going to show, right?
On that page, you can render React. This is done this way so you can like render it again. For example, like with new data. So if I do like React node 2, and if I do like hello 2, and if I refresh, you will see hello 2. So it's like it rendered this one first, but now I can render it again. And
if I add like set timeout or something, oops. It will be hello and then hello 2. So this is kind of like imperative way to talk to your React components from the outside. And here we just passing in like a new child. So it could be like new callback or whatnot. It will make sure that when you call render, it will not actually like destroy the DOM that's already there. It will only it works the same way as state or props are, even though you call it kind of like imperatively.
In a sense, this is really close to like how set state works. It will do kind of like all the same stuff. Now let me figure out. Yeah, so this is just to show that like this React node, you would traditionally write it as JSX. There is this syntax that is used by compiler. So when you compile your JSX file into .js file, it will do something like that. It's really easy to kind of like to see how like one turns into the other. And
I guess probably have time to showcase that. But when you write something, it will turn it into those JSX pragma or whatever it's called. So it will use this module, JSX runtime, and all the JSX that you wrote, it will turn into this syntax. So like HTML tag is now this. Head is a first child of that. And it's using JSX or JSX S for when you have like multiple children. But yeah, you can like when you choose between like React, all that stuff, you need to change just like the runtime, and it will call the other runtime with it with the same JSX. It will like just know which one to use. Dino uses that kind of like a lot.
And there's a kind of like not there is the syntax that is like not depending on the compiler. That's what you sometimes use when you're like writing a library or something.
Yeah, so this is like an official kind of like API level for your user code to use, but this is what kind of like compilers do, and this is how you write it regularly.
So yeah, so the second step is just to make it a bit more just to make it look more like a traditional create React app, which is, yeah, let's create a component that's called app. I don't know if you like if you notice the difference, right? So like we had this thing kind of like here. So we were rendering this div before, but now we are rendering again using like using.
I think I was showing something like that. I took this div and like put it here, right? So we were rendering this JSX div, and now we're rendering a function that will return us that JSX div.
Using JSX function is basically kind of like this is what you have to use if you don't have a JSX compiler. So you have to think about it as like app and whatever I was, yeah. So now we are rendering instead of kind of like render me.
I think I was showing something like app, right? So instead of this, it's app.
A div, I'm like, oh, render me an app. Why are we rendering an app? Because one way of thinking about it is I can just call this function, right? And it will just return that div. But in this way, it will be just that div. If I'm rendering an app, I can have state, I can have all kinds of like React stuff, right? That's how you turn kind of like static div into React components. Okay. So I think we talked about all of this stuff. And yeah, if you want to play with that, just to see like how how kind of like crazy JSX transforms are, yeah, just I recommend checking out those links. Yeah. Okay. Now we're going a bit into more complicated thing. So the first thing when you want to do when you're writing a framework is that you want to hydrate it instead of rendering it. The difference basically is that like when I refresh this one, you see the empty screen at first, but then like when React boots up, it will render it. So now if I go to this one, which is hydrate. But yeah, it also has like a use effect just to show that it's like alive. I'm not pulling any tricks. So the only kind of like thing that happened is that if I don't have this HTML kind of like there before we're rendering, we're going to get a lot of warnings. And the idea is that like you're supposed to run hydrate function on something that you like rendered with React before. We're not doing that part.
So basically, because I don't have a server, right? So everything is inside of HTML. I could have done the whole demo with hydrateRoot. I probably should. I don't know if that's like it's just what I was what I wanted to try. But it makes it a bit more real for me. It's like when at every step that you can see that it will still continue to work. So if I remove this HTML, which is like presumably rendered on the server, now I have the first like a blank page at first, and now I have like those minified not minified hydration errors. Like it still works, but it's like, hey, you're promising me that there's going to be HTML. Like, why you don't have it? And it's I think it's really clear how to like the exercise that we're doing here. Instead of generating this on the server and generating this on the client, we just kind of like know what the client is going to generate and just like put the initial HTML there. It's not completely kind of like stupid idea to do that manually, I meant, but it is something that like framework would do, and it makes it a bit more real, makes it a bit more like that's cheating. Kinda, but you feel like this is a real app because it uses hydrateRoot, and it's real, but it's still easy to do that manually. It's like, yeah, just make sure that this is the same HTML, right? So if I have hello 2 here, I will get hydration warnings again. But if I match this thing to what this produces, yeah, it's as if we're running, I don't know, like remix Next.js and all that stuff. Oh, hi Thomas, I haven't seen you in a while. This is clearly showing the evolution of those concepts. Yeah, I think, and if you started with Next.js, like you never even like thought about it, right? You're like, I don't know, it works, I guess, until it shows me warnings. But here you can kind of like touch bytes, right? Like on punch cards.
I'm just like manually kind of like putting it there. And instead of create root, we're calling hydrateRoot. But otherwise, it's kind of all the same. Does anyone have any questions? Because it will get a bit more complicated than that. Does that kind of like make sense even for people who haven't used React without JSX before?
I think I lost people only like in the probably like in the last demo. I think so far everyone's kind of like, yeah, that's like, so far this kind of makes sense.
So the next step is what you want to do when you're like writing like a real framework, is that you are going to put your whole app into.
Yeah, here when I say real framework, I don't mean real server framework. I mean real React framework. So just to keep my nomenclature straight.
React, and that's basically so you can like change your head, you can do like all sorts of stuff, and it's actually, again, it's not that complicated. We just need to the same idea is like our div with hello should have matched our app, and now we're saying, okay, let's match everything as well. So it's like we're going to start with HTML, and like HTML had like a language on it, so we have to.
Yeah, it's kind of like hard to show that in one screen. But the idea is that everything like HTML stayed the same, and our app stayed the same. So our app just shows like this div hello, but now everything that is above that app we want to put in hydrateRoot as well, which again is like not that crazy. I could have made kind of like a few steps between. So it's like, first let's add this like div, right? So you're doing this by creating a div that is wrapping app, then that div is inside of the body. So we're wrapping that div, we're putting it in as a child in body and so on. So I just recreate this existing HTML, right? That is kind of like wrapping that app, and I just put it as. So React team likes to use the term like static. How do they call it? Static something, static markup, I guess, or static JSX. I don't know. So this is kind of like static stuff, right? Which is like not a client component. It's just kind of like we need an HTML and a head and a body and a div with ID root.
Have to add it as well. It also had a head, so, and that head had a title. So if I like put something, if I put something that is like not matching, I will get those hydration errors again. So we're still doing that JSX app. So all of this stuff kind of like that's happening here, it's kind of like static, but then we are saying, and then run our app. This hydration warning stuff, don't worry about it. It's just because I'm doing all of this like inside of HTML. There are like ways around it, but the main point is that
yeah. So I'm doing hydration warning here, suppress hydration warning. That's because I need to put, in order for everything to hydrate, the content here should be the content of the script, right? So, oops. So in a sense, I should just like copy everything, right? And just like put it inside of the string. But then the string has changed, so I need to put like some other stuff. So just like not to blow everyone's minds, I just like, yeah, just and this script corresponds to the same script. If it was like an external file, which I didn't want to do, so so that like everything is still kind of like visible, I could have just like that script would have been easier to hydrate because it would have been script src equals something, right? And that's, yeah, that's it. you can change the content without changing the HTML. But yeah, like I don't like that I have had to do that. I don't know. Maybe I should improve that for like the next version of this talk.
as long as we represent the whole.
Oh, I guess that's like in the video. Sinania. I don't know how to like properly pronounce that, but this guy, he tried to say to me that like my video capture died, and I was too busy giving the actual talk to see the chat, right? So like I haven't realized that my talk is not recording, but he tried to warn me. Thank you.
The whole
Sinania is now following
as this application, which in our case, like these parts are static, only like this part can change. It will work. It's surprisingly kind of like surprisingly simple. And so yeah, so it still works. But now if we go to like React DevTools, oh yeah, React DevTools don't work with this like CDN stuff. Unfortunately, it shows like this warning, right? But if you go to React DevTools, you will see like that HTML element and all of those other elements until the app. And
I guess that's also like one of the things that I could have done to make this demo a bit clearer if I made DevTools work.
Okay. So now we're going to the next one. So this is this is where I'm connecting everything that I just showed you to React server components. And the way that I'm going to talk about it is the following. So we have this React node, which is like kind of like JavaScript object, right? So if you do toString on it, it's going to be object. So it's like it's not serializable by default. But what if we could take that React node and we can turn it into some kind of JSX string?
Okay, I think I'm talking about the next slide. So so what I kind of like skipped for time here is that I talked a bit more about like how JSX actually like that JSX function works. When you call when you write JSX as like div, right? The compiler will turn it into that JSX runtime function call, and that function is it is literally kind of like just this. It will just create that object, which again, like in Solid, for example, that's not how it works. But I could have done the whole presentation using like this syntax, but I just didn't want it. It doesn't look as clean, but I think it has like it's better because it's like there are kind of like less steps in between. So I might try to do that as well. So yeah, and the idea is that you have this, which is just a tag for React to know like, oh, someone is trying to render something. Is it like React component, or is it just like a garbage that got it like because in JSX, right, you can write just like and something, right? And who knows if that's like actual React component or a string, or it's just, I don't know, date, right? So React needs to know that. And type is the interesting one because it's like for div, it's just type. And for app, it's a function that you call with like props. So it's an interesting kind of like separation. And yeah, so I skipped this for time, but the idea is that like when you look at this thing, like what do you what are the words that you should be saying when you hear it? And I hear people calling this VDOM, which is pretty close, but like technically I think that's not correct. And when you send like React or components payloads over the wire, some people call it VDOM, which again I don't think it's the right name. Okay, so this is kind of like my this is my way of thinking about it. Is if you go and create a div, which is like a DOM element, right? So you can only do that on client. This is going to be a div element or DOM element. I mean, DOM element of div. When you create, when you call React create element, again, you can do that on server. It looks like it's fine, right? So it's a primitive React element. The primitive part is because I'm calling div. If I would have done app here, it would not be primitive. But I'm like saying, here's the div that you can actually create in browser. Here's the div you can create in React, and those primitive React elements, like you're calling like a render function, right? And it returned primitive React element. That React element needs to be turned into VDOM, and then React can render that VDOM into actual DOM. And it does that through reconciler, because reconciler gets like the new version of VDOM. So like your render function, so your component, in the render function of your component, it returned a new React element, and that React element has to be turned into VDOM so that you can compare it to previous VDOM and to like, oh, it returned the same one, we don't need to do anything. Oh, it returned a different one. That's where reconciler kicks in, and it will like create React elements, create DOM elements, or like update DOM elements, or remove DOM elements, all of that stuff. And like reconciler already works on VDOM, not on React components, or not even on React elements, as far as kind of like my understanding of all of that goes. Yeah, so this is the difference of like, this is, what's going so React create element app is a React element, but React create element div is a primitive React element. So when you call a component, that component can return React node. So React node includes all of the kind of like null, undefined, like strings, like kind of like booleans and numbers and all that stuff. It could also return the React element, so it can return like a kind of like a new function. Oh, funny screen graph. So it can also return a new React element that you should like also call, so to get kind of like lower and lower and lower. And kind of like thing that I didn't write here, right, is that React server components are like one step above of that stuff. So you start with React server component and you try to render it, and you don't render it to DOM. Like you're not aiming to render to DOM. When you're going through it, when you see React elements that are like not primitive element, when you see React elements, you need to figure out if there are server components or client components. For server components, you want to call them. For clients components, you just like, here, like stop here. We don't know how to render anymore. This is a client component that needs SSR or like a browser rendering. Like we finished our React server components rendering. And if it's a React Server component, you call it again, you get what it returns, and it will return again like different types. So I didn't kind of like figure out how to put it all in words, but in this way, like rendering React Server components is really close to actual like VDOM rendering, but you need to come up with all of the same words, but for this new process. And I think we kind of like didn't come up with them yet. Okay, I think I'm going to like the next slide already here, and this is yeah. Let me talk.
Then we could send that string over the network. We can like embed it into. It's not serializable by default, but what if we could take that React node and we can turn it into some kind of JSX string? Then we could send that string over the network. We can like embed it into HTML the way that like in Next.js, or it's like underscore next data. In Remix, it's something similar, right? So it's like we can put that thing there and serialize it. And the idea there is that this thing could be on the server as long as you like generate the string, right? But now hydrateRoot and like dehydrating the whole app is going to happen in the client. So I'm not like doing all of this stuff because I would need like a server that will like do all this stuff. I'm just showing you that this is possible. And the way that I'm doing this is I wrote this like packUnpack function. The idea is that it will like turn something into a string and then like bring it back to life. So it's like you should just imagine that this part is like on the server, but here you're getting like real, as far as you know, React node on the client.
So someone had a question. I don't remember what exactly they asked.
Yeah. So the unfortunate answer to this, that unpack kind of happens twice, but like we're not going to talk about it too much. For like this thing, what I'm showing is that you pack your React component into a string, and you.
I'm basically trying to prove that React node is serializable, and so it's like you can have React node that is like not serializable, and you can have React node that is serializable. How are you going to check that? Can you turn it into string and bring it back again or not? That's the way to to think about it. Again, I should probably come up with like a better with a better explanation of this. Like everyone who talks about React Server components have to talk about this part in some way, and I didn't want it to talk about it too much. I think it's kind of like not that impressive, but I need to figure out a way to explain people that it actually works.
Send it in like inside of HTML. So that's what server does. But then on the client, you can pick that string up and render it. In our case, because like as I said, like everything is happening in one file, you just have to like imagine. But like this happens on the server, this happens on the client. The important part is that we get this JSX string. We can like console log it and check that that actually works. And if you have this, in a sense, it's like, do you have this algorithm to turn any React component into a string, right? That's basically the question. And can you turn it back to life? So I'm going to show you really like simplified version of this. Dan Abramov wrote an article that is like RSCs from scratch or something like that, where he goes into a bit more details. He handles like not all the, but like a lot of edge cases. But yeah, we're not going to do that. So just just a fun kind of like just a fun exercise, right? Like how would you start it? Like how do you turn that thing? So we're going to look at this file, and
so just a bit of like setup. So everything kind of like here so far is the same. I do fix that hydration warning here with this thing. Again, kind of like don't worry about it, it works. But the idea is the same. So we have HTML, all of that's kind of like static stuff. Then we have our application, and I can clearly kind of like render it like that, right? So it will work. But can I turn it into string and bring it back from string again? That's if I could, that kind of like allows me to do server components.
Like it still works. So we have this React node. I will actually like console log it.
Fortran 999 is now following.
I was like, is that in the recording or is the real one? Okay, thank you for the follow. Fortran 99 was the fun one. I think I only got to Fortran 90.
Console log it as like a real object that is like that's the object that you will have on the server, and it's like it has this like type of it's a plain object. It has this like type of React element, so we know that this object is something that React should handle, right? It should know how to render it, and it has this type HTML, and then it has like props. In props, it has children, so it has like head and a body. So you see, it's basically like the same structure. But if I just like
I think I'm showing this. So this is like console log of the live thing that was created with JSX functions. So it has type of this, and it has type HTML. So it's primitive React element. But it also has children, and children are like head and body and all that stuff. So that's until we get to this one, which has a type function, which is like app.
let me store it as global variable. If I just like JSON stringify it, oops, you will get this, which is.
I think I'm doing console log JSON stringify. Yeah, so now we lost symbols and some other data, and we also lost the app. So ID is root, and children is this object that doesn't have a type function anymore because we can't serialize functions.
This, which is actually like close enough. The problem that is going to happen here is that at some point we're going to have an app, which is like a function, right? So like app is a component, and it doesn't know how to render that. So, and again, because we're doing this just JSON stringify, because those objects don't have the symbol React element anymore, React will actually like not render it. So like we have to handle all of that stuff inside of our packUnpack, and there are like right ways to do that, but I'm using like the simple way of doing it. So JSON stringify has this like second argument that is you usually like put a null there, right? But it will actually give you like the key and the value that is about to be turned to a string, and you can like explain what to do with it. So for example, here I'm skipping some keys because it's like a whole story. But I can also like do something with it. So for example, with that like symbol, I can turn it into a string somehow. The fun part that is going to happen here is that because we have a function here, right? So this is the did I show it here? So body.
I'm trying to find it here.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So the idea is that like here where we have our like div with ID, our type is this function. So usually type is like div or body, right? But here it's a function. So this is like client component basically, right? So like in order to render app, you need to have the code for app on the client. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And we're going to do this in a really like silly way. We're going to have basically kind of like a registry of registered kind of like client components. Oops.
I think my screen died again, so
Do I do something?
That would have killed my screen recording again.
Okay. That's usually that's usually how it goes, right? Okay. some technical difficulties later. So we will basically have some kind of like global store of like all the client components that could be. And we are just going to like, if I have an app, it's going to be a client app. If I have an app 2, it's going to be client app 2. Like in the real framework, it would have to be kind of like a bit more smarter than that, but this is what we're doing. Otherwise, we're just passing value as is. We're just hoping that like no one passes anything complex. In like a real implementation, that's where kind of like all the crazy stuff goes. That is like, how do I serialize the promise? How do I serialize like a kind of like API route and all that stuff? So we're skipping all this. And so for unpacking is like now we need to add those symbols back to JSX components, because I can send like an object as a prop, right? It doesn't have to be like a component. So, but for JSX components, I have to add a symbol back so that React knows that this is a React component. And so this is my like global registry of client components. It just checks that if the string starts with a client, I'm going to return app. So app here is a function, right? So it's like the JSON that I'm creating, this JSON has to have a function there. It has to have this client component there. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And for all the other stuff, we just like do it as is. Does anyone want to see like this how it looks? Okay, so
this is where
so
console logs.
this is the string that we created. So we're just like type of. We just need to have some kind of like way to say that it's a React component. Then props is just an object, right? So it's like this is our HTML tag that has some children, and we go until we have a client. So this is where you will. This is where you need to have like this client manifest or whatever it's called. Like this resolution of like how do I turn this piece of JSX into like actual function that I can call. And we're doing this just to make React happy about hydration. So it's like this function has to have a copy, like the script has to have a copy of itself. Otherwise, it's not going to match the hydration. But then we're turning everything back to React components. The only difference that if we like console log like React node before we packed it, I think I do it. Yeah, I do it here. So the only difference is going to be like those underscore things. It's just like it's just what JSX function does. It's kind of like not important, but
what I'm talking about is that the thing that the thing that was created by calling JSX functions have all of this stuff for some reason. I didn't figure it out, and in the new one, I don't use that, so it only has kind of like the required the required stuff, type of, props, type, and all that stuff.
Otherwise, it's going to be like exactly the same thing. So, and if you go to body, and if you go to children, dev, where is it? Okay, it's a script. Where's the
yeah? So it's back to the function again.
Okay, here. Okay, it's also not here. Okay, here. Okay, so we have this root, and now the type is that function. So I cheated a bit by using this this thing, but you have to imagine that it should work kind of like that.
When I say cheated, this is basically like this part. So how do I, like here, I not only have the string that I said, hey, this is how we're hydrating, but I also have this app function, which in a sense, like the right way of doing that is just like import, I don't know, like clients, and like then just like the name of the thing, right? So like as long as I put app inside of app.js, it's going to work, which I could do. I just didn't want it. Again, it's not going to be like all in one file if I do that.
Otherwise, you're not getting like a function here. Okay, does that kind of like make sense so far? Cool. So right, so we covered that. So this is that point that I was trying to make before. Is like you have everything inside of client component. That's great, but like how do how do I get new data when I like navigate to a different route? Like how do I get that? Like the simple answer is like, yeah, just use React Query and like all of that stuff. Like you already have this app function like sent to you. It's like it's just going to work. That's great. But we're going to kind of like go a bit deeper, and I skipped a few steps how to like get there, like intermediate steps basically. So we're going to do kind of like both things at the same time. The one thing is that we're going to do is that like here we had that like React node or whatever it was called, like just like this is like the root of our application. So now the root of our application is actually a client component that is like browser only. So when you hear about React Server Components, the first thing that you hear is like you have to have like server.
I guess I'll like pause myself for a second. So the idea is that we called hydrateRoot before on React Node, but now we're basically like passing React Node as a prop to this client component. So we used to have client application called app. We used to have static kind of like wrapper on top of it. And now we are adding one more wrapper that is completely client-side code, which means that we just describe it here. Like there's no, it's not a part of client application. It's a part of the framework, and the framework will just send this component. And this is like one more wrapper. And the previous React node, we like pass it as a prop, and then we just use that to like return from that component. So this component doesn't like actually add a wrapper, right? It doesn't have like a div here because our client is already like HTML tag. There can't be like a DOM wrapper on top of it, but there could be kind of like logic wrapper on top of it.
When you hear about React Server Components, the first thing that you hear is like, you have to have like server component at the root of your application. But it's like, yes, for the application, but the framework itself, it works differently. The framework itself has to have this client-only, kind of like browser-only component that will pull that your application root into it. So again, just imagine it's a JSX. We're rendering this component and we are passing something to it. So like that something is going to be that initial React node, the one that starts with like HTML. And
I guess the difference is that like when I say initial client here, I already add this layer of like we got it through the wire, where this is the one that we kind of like got from server.
The idea is that we get this from props and we put it in state. And now if we change the state, it will render like a different route. And the way that we're going to do that is like in 2 seconds, I'm emulating some navigation. And on that navigation, I'm going to get new React node that presumably like came from the server, right? So like we can serialize it and deserialize it. And I'm just going to set kind of like the state of application. So it's like I'm going to set like, yeah, the set of application to this new React route. Okay. So let's see if that works. So what is the difference? I have it here. Yeah, so what is the difference between those two routes, right? So one is going to have like title change to new title. So again, like the first one has to have to match the what HTML we have, like otherwise we get hydration errors. But like after that, we can change it. And we're going to actually pass some props to our client component. So, so this is like on navigation, what server returned was like mostly the same, but title changed and some data changed. So this is okay. Yeah, let me look at it. So first thing is that what we do in client component. Sorry, here. So what we do in client component, we will like wait for 1 second and change the name. So like change some internal state of the application. But what we do like in 2 seconds when we change the route, we will change kind of like the layout or like So our application is just like a node inside of the application instead of like the whole React tree.
Okay, look, I've made a few errors when I was describing that. So we have our app. App is the same one as before. It says hello, then it says hello world in 1 second. But our wrapper on top of app is this thing that will wait 2 seconds until doing navigation.
And we change kind of like React tree around it. So we see this first like change from hello world, from hello to hello world, but now we see this like server prop. So this is the props that we passed, and we see the title changes from like title to new title. And again, the only thing that we did is that we changed this kind of like we changed this thing. You can think of it like I've kind of like as JSX. So we were returning one JSX, and now we're returning like the other. I don't know if you noticed that, but when we render,
I renamed client to JSX here.
When we change the whole the whole React tree that is like above our app stayed the same. And this is like those things that is like kind of like hard to implement in server frameworks, but it's like, yeah, it's like of course it's the same. It's like we had the same.
So what I'm talking about is that our state here, like this timeout, it already happened. And even though we got a new page, right, we rendered everything, the state inside of the app hasn't changed, which is kind of like persistent islands, right? That's the problem that like Turbolinks, all that stuff try to solve. For in here, it's kind of like obviously like why would it change?
The same structure. Just before we were rendering app like without children, and now we're passing new props. It's like it's not that surprising. If you use a key on client components, you can actually force it to reset your state. So like navigation happened, and it's like back to hello. That kind of like make any sense? If you go to like here,
I think people were like somewhat with me and here, so I can change this app. Like this is the same app, right? And I can add a key here, or I can add a key here. If keys don't match, React now thinks that it's a different component and it resets the states, right? But but the key, if the same, it knows that it's the thing that needs to be preserved. Again, maybe I should have created like a better way to show that. But this is how regular, usual client React works, even though we kind of did like a server navigation and created like a new server components returned on the server on new route and all that stuff.
And console log app, right? If I refresh it, it first shows the app in its like original state. Then 1 second passed, and it re-rendered the client app. Now we did server navigation. We render this app again, and we like start the timer again, and it re-rendered again. So now if I go back to the key.
Okay, I was showing you like the wrong demo. So here it shows like initial state, then re-rendered with the same state. Here it shows that the app kind of like got reset with the new props, and now like the state has changed.
And I comment it out again. And it rendered 3 times instead of 4 times. So before, like between those two, that's where internal state changed. And the third one is like internal state didn't change, only like the we got new props. Okay. So
I think I was already out of time.
This already looks like a real framework. We can change titles. We can do kind of like server-driven kind of like changes. We can pass like new props to like existing client components and all that stuff. So it already kind of.
So this is how title changed. This is how we pass new children to app. You can imagine that this is where you can like send new data to your app, right? So if you have a provider that is like current URL or current title or whatnot, you can pass that new server data to that.
And like even though it's a I don't know, like 50 lines of code or whatnot, it's already kind of like has all the kind of like moving parts of the real framework. Okay, so one other aspect of it is that like everything was done through React. We didn't have kind of like anything kind of like too magical that was happening outside of React. We can actually make it even more React-like. And if you played with like new, okay, I don't have the link, and I'm like so lost. If you played with, I'm sorry, I was.
Yeah, so when I was saying that I'm lost, I didn't copy this this URL here. Yeah, so 10. It's the same app. The only difference is that now client router has changed. So before it had like a bit more logic. Now it's just the only thing that it does, it changes URL. So the thing that gets new data for that new URL is this thing. And it's a bit of like a nod to Next.js because they have a receipt component, I think.
Let me restart. Let me try to remember what I was going to for. So here, what I'm doing is that I'm using more React to implement our client router. And if you play it with new React, you can have like this react.use, and it's basically like a way to resolve promises in React. So I can turn my whole thing that can talk to the server to get like to unpack thing. So it's like if I'm on a new root, I can fetch data for that root, including like the new data through props, right, and new bundle through that like client underscore kind of like thing. I can just turn it kind of like the whole navigation into a promise and just use React cache and React use, and it's like I already kind of like got the whole React Server Components framework. And just a funny side note is that like this client router, it is really a client thing. I can use like providers. I can use all kinds of things to that would allow me to build this like router as cool as I wanted to, and I can create like router context and then like user and then client components can like talk to that context, because it's like it's the whole root. Everything is under React. That's kind of like was the first step that we started from, right? Everything has to be inside the React. Okay, so I think this kind of like demo should should kind of like explain you a lot of how they actually like kind of like structure it. And the kind of like surprising part is that while you're authoring everything is just like, oh, I just write React, I just like add use client, use servers from time to time, but like otherwise like I don't have to think about it. The actual implementation is going to have like a few like separate parts that are working in kind of like different constraints, sets of constraints or something. So one is this this kind of like this code. I forgot how they call it, like Bootstrap something. This code that is like browser only thing that will call your render.
Okay, I'm probably already talking about this thing. There is one more demo that I didn't do. It was there just to show that once you have this React Server components doing like navigation, all that stuff, you can just go to this thing and replace hydrate with create_root, right? And it will still continue working. So like SSR is not essential part of React Server components. As long as you have API that returns you kind of like that, as long as you have API that can return something that you can turn in JSX, that's all that you need. That's why like React Server components for SSG is possible. Yeah, just save all those where I do like packUnpack. Where is it? Yeah. So just save those strings, right? So like once you turn your application into a string, just save that string on CDN. It's going to work. There's kind of like nothing too magical happening after that point. And yeah, I kind of like didn't figure out how to put that in in that talk. I think I'm talking about this one already.
Sure.
But I skip this, I guess. It's not that important.
That will call your hydrateRoot. That will do all of this, like fetching of the new data of the new like RC and all that stuff. So that means that on the server you have to have some code that will kind of like correspond to all of that stuff. So it's like you need to have some API routes that will like answer requests to like, hey, please render this RC to me and all that stuff. But you also have to call render to pipeable string, which is like render like a new version of render to string that is like to generate that initial kind of like HTML that users see. And your framework will actually have this client, which is like a use client code, right? So it's like if you're writing a router or a link, that router or link, they have to have like a context and all that stuff that is like only works in clients. And like D levels deeper, now that's where your like root of your application starts. And it's like a funny thing because like
in Next.js, that's like layout file where you first put your HTML tag.
Looked at Next.js, which like hello world of Next.js. It has 16 components that live above your HTML tag, which is like the first thing you hear is like, oh, you have to like start at the like root has to be on the server. It's like, yeah, but like what about those 16 components, right?
So if I go to like upload thing, and if I go to DevTools, did it work? Yeah. So much stuff that I don't. Oh yeah, I have to turn on. Yeah, I have to turn off filter so that I can see HTML tags. HTML. Okay. I didn't click it. Okay. So this is the HTML tag. That's where your like template starts, and it's like above it, it's this one, then that one, then this one, and so on. So it's like all of this stuff is added on top of your thing, and some of this is just client only, that kind of client router component, which is like just the regular React. It's like it's not kind of like SSR. It's just there to do, I don't know, like yeah, I presume like routing. Yeah, so this one maybe like talks to the to backend to get all of this. So 3, right? So that's probably some kind of like RC payloads and stuff. Yeah, I don't know. And I haven't looked deeply into that, but yeah, just to show that like the the HTML tag is here. And this is like what you, oh, this has your whole application starts on the server. Yeah, what about this part of the
it's like there are a lot of things that are happening above your root, and you can always kind of like switch to this client only thing where you can use all of your regular kind of like client only things, but you would have to send that code. That's where our like client underscore app thing was happening. That's where the, like this idea of like zero bundle size thing is that this code that is like server only application code, it will not generate, it will not need JavaScript code, JavaScript kind of like functions to render it. It's already rendered. Okay, and yeah, and just a funny thing of like looking how all of this is implemented is that it's funny how like how everything is in React. So you saw that with like use state or with like use cache and all that stuff. It's like yeah, like React already has all of those kind of like primitives to handle all of those like re-renderings and all that stuff. I'm actually like skipping a lot. So for example, they do like this like start transition, all that stuff that is like even makes everything is even better. And it's like, again, that's like React feature that allows you to optimize stuff. Like you're not writing like non-React code, even though you're writing like this kind of like complicated framework. And yeah, and the other thing that I'm kind of like not covering is that function that can like serialize stuff and deserialize stuff. You can go kind of like wild with it. So it's like, okay, what if I want to serialize, I don't know, like a date, right? So it's like an object that is notoriously kind of like complicated to send over the wire. Like I can technically do that, right? So it's like, what if I need to serialize the promise, for example? Jack Harrington just did a video about like how to just like pass promise as a prop to client component, and then you just like use that prop, or like just like wait for it to resolve and all that stuff, and you get this data kind of like in kind of like streaming mode. So you can do a lot with that, and you can get kind of like some fancy features from it. Just a fun note, this is the last one. So what I do here is that I don't have that like div root anymore. Like I don't have anything in it, and it shows as an empty page first. But like everything that we just talked about works. So it's like all the kind of like talking to the server to get RC, all that stuff. Like it all works. You don't have to use hydrate thing, right? So you don't have to render anything on the server except for that like JSX string that we were doing in packUnpack. And this is actually how this framework by Daishi called Waku, this is how it works. It's like it doesn't do any SSR. It just does this thing of like you saying, hey, I want to turn this thing into like RSC payload so I can render it on the client. So it's like it's a I don't know, it's a funny concept. You can play with that. And I'm actually like out of time, but I will like just mention briefly some stuff. So what is actually like happening? Like why are we doing that? So now once you have this syntax, you can like every component turns into like a thing that can get its own data. And so before, because it had to use render to string, like everything had to happen before React, because otherwise it's like this thing expect like synchronous application. You have to resolve everything first, and then you try to like render it. But now you kind of like inverse this a bit. You kind of like you putting this promise inside of React, and that's why they call it like built fully in React now. And there's this is like how I'm kind of like emulating like server components. I mean, like just showing how it kind of like works. Because like this is a server component, and you can do like fun stuff, right? So you can await some promises. You can like you can just like pass the others as there are, like not awaiting them. You can branch inside of your React code, and just by the way that it works, it's like whatever JSX whatever component is returned here, that's the component that we're going to send to the browser. So it actually like makes this like lazy loading or whatever. Like, how do I make my bundle smaller? It's just like, yeah, just like add an if. It's like if this user doesn't require this component, just like don't render that component, and user will not get the bundle. So
yeah, I'm like going pretty quickly through this, but like in my original talk, I had this like big example of like, oh, what if I'm using a component that is like 1 megabyte in dependencies, and like how do I make sure that it's not sent? And all of that lazy loading is pretty complicated. But because the way that how React server components work, it doesn't matter if kind of like here you import like one thing. Okay, let's say dep1, dep2. Oops, what's going on? What's going on? Okay, so I have dep1, dep2, and if I have like this here, right? It doesn't matter if I already imported it. If I didn't return it, then there that function that will like serialize stuff. If it didn't get that component inside of returned JSX, there is no need to serialize it. So you don't look at what gets imported in your component. You look at what is actually used in your component, what is actually rendered. So all of those lazy loading tricks that you have to do, they kind of like get solved automatically. Which is, yeah, if you use like Quick, you're probably like, who cares? It's pretty easy. But okay, so just to make sure that I didn't kind of like miss anything, because I was out of time, I was like skipping a lot of stuff. So okay. So first is that I think I talked about everything from here, but now why would you want to have a system that allows you to turn subcomponents into React Node instead of just turning them into HTML? Okay, don't remember what I meant by that. Yeah, so this is what I meant by like that client router or whatever component that I created. That component is a React component, so it has all the features of React, like context and all that stuff. So you're not limited in any way if you're a framework author. Yeah, so because this was like a remix, right? So I'm talking like, hey, this is how like every component now has its own loader instead of like just a page loader. So it's basically kind of like, just imagine you apply remix but at component level, right? So like in remix you can use like streaming, you can use data from the server, you can use like server actions, all that stuff. So like just apply that thinking to component level instead of a page level. Yeah, you can go deeper with that, and yeah, the relay did that. That's for sure. So this is just like kind of like instructions, short instructions. So like how does SSR actually work, right? So because this function is synchronous, everything that needs to be like loaded and like you need to get you need to get stuff from database or something like that, all of this has to be done outside of React, because React can only render stuff that's already there. There is like no async kind of like primitives in React previously. So this is the structure of your application, which again allowed you to do something like if props, I don't know, like is 404, right? Then you can do like response 404 or something like that, right? So but it has to be done outside of React. So your framework have to be doing all of this stuff. So now, if your components could have been async, right? They could get those props. So it's like kind of like implementing Next.js if you have React Server components like framework. Kind of like, yeah, just call the call the get server side props or whatever function. Just call it inside of the component. That's all that you need. And you also get that kind of like stuff about because that pipe, it has to have all that logic about like how to load client components, all that stuff, like that serialization logic, depending on like what you need to be sent, all that stuff. So like that could be a promise, that could be, I don't know, like server suspense or whatnot. Like you can do all of that stuff in React now.
It's like, if this promise failed, like I'm not getting like any of that stuff, even though this could be like a client component, right? It doesn't matter if it's client or server. It's not running. I'm not shipping anything from it. And
I'm not shipping from here.
Okay, so I think to understand kind of like RCs, you have to look a bit into relay. like one funny way you can think about React Server Components is like React components return React nodes that can be turned into DOM, and React Server Components return return basically kind of like applications, client applications, and it like the rendering of React Server Components to get application is kind of pretty easy. You just like look at the first child. If it's a div, it's a div. Like we don't have to do anything. If it's a function, we just say that like okay, just like send this function to the client. Like we don't have to look kind of like deeper into what is going on. It's like that we are stopping here. So it's kind of like a virtual virtual client components. So it's like one is returning virtual DOM, the other is returning virtual client components. I don't know if that makes sense, but I was amused by myself when I came up with that. Yeah, and that like ability to serialize stuff is cool because we probably are going to see kind of like more of that and more features that could be done through that, because it's like React Server Components is more like a filling, kind of like a gem stack. There is no kind of like specific ways of doing that. There are like already like 10 implementations of React Server Components, so like not all of them are going to have like all the same features. So that's why I'm excited about the Remix Server Components, of course, because that's going to be like a fun way to see how other big frameworks are doing it. But yeah, already kind of like Redwood and like a few others, like big players, already kind of like said, yeah, we're going to support React Server Components. Okay, that's it. I think the only thing I'm going to say is that I'm actually looking for a job, so if someone wants to hire me, yeah, just let me know.
Which is still true.
And yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, I think there were no questions or anything like that. So that's it. That's the talk. I managed to do 1 hour talk in 2 hours, which is not great. But I think I at least kind of like at least I oops. At least I like talked about everything that we talked there. Yeah, so some console logs. Yeah, so I will just commit it from demos that I did on the stream. Okay, that's it. Thanks everyone who who got through all of this thing. Yeah, I think like the closing notes is that I did all of this stuff. It was pretty cool to figure out how to like how it works underneath. I think this like thinking about rendering of client components when you call a component, it returns a React element, and then you can render it to DOM or like to string in case of SSR. And when you call React server components, they return React nodes. Some of them could be basically like a marker of this is like a virtual instead of just React node, it's a React client app, and that's where the kind of like the rendering stops. It's just like just like function from that file with those props, and that's where the kind of like the rendering stops. Then you need to be able to turn that rendered React Server component into HTML that will have all the kind of like links to get client code, and you should be able to turn it into SSR version of the component, right? So where all the HTML tags turn into HTML tags. So yeah, one way of putting that kind of like shortly is that rendering of client components returns VDOM, but rendering of server components returns virtual client components. They're not real client components because there is like this serialization step that's there, but I think like the way that I try to put it when talking to someone, yeah, just imagine that React Server components, in case of Next.js, right? So just imagine that each route in app folder returns pages route, pages kind of like a how do you call it? Pages app. Yeah, not the greatest name, but just imagine that React. Just imagine next 13, when server components render, they generate React Next.js 12 kind of like application. So which has some parts that are just like static that would have been written by hands, but now you can use React server components rendering to get that, and you can also pass some data this way. So I don't know. I feel like I made it a bit more complicated when I said it. Yeah. Other than that, I'm completely out of time, and hopeful. Yeah, this is just a way for me to recover somehow this talk that I gave without like any screen sharing. But I think I will be working on like a new version of this that is going to be like a bit more focused and a bit just like faster, faster hitting without a lot of that kind of like even like nuance and history. Just like how server components work. And if you want to do more deeply, like just watch this whole 2-hour thing. Okay. Thanks everyone, and hopefully you like it. If you have any questions, just let me know, because I'm working on like the new versions of this, so that I can make it